As I can see, Darryl has joined us now. So welcome, Darryl. How are you today?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks for having me. And hello, everyone. Look forward to speaking.
Thanks, Darryl. It's good to have you with us. I don't know if you caught there me saying on your intro notes there how we had the pleasure of welcoming you to our London event back in, I think we worked out it was 2018. It all seems like a long time ago and very strange that we were able to shake hands and things like that.
Seems like ages ago, Chris. I remember that. It was quite a warm day, actually. I remember it sweating in my suit back then, but now we're all casual and now we're all online. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, comfortable as ever. So let's kick things off. In your role, you're responsible for a degree of strategic transformation. In a sense, the pandemic has torn up the rule book over the last 12 months. Just how much of your own strategy and approach have you had to change?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, Chris. I mean, when I speak to our stakeholders, business strategy, IT strategy, we are really underscoring the importance of digital transformation. I think that there are even more importance to continue a lot of the strategies, and effectively what this pandemic has done is more accelerated a lot of the activities that we only wish that we could have done. So in some regards, this pandemic has really driven our digitalization efforts, put much more importance and emphasis on it. And people realize, the digital activities that we have been progressing for several years now is actually, we need to actually do it. And, what we're seeing now is much more insight or much more kind of want or need from the business side, so much more investment. And of course, that comes with much more accountability and the need to deliver as well. So, so from a business perspective, the importance of digital transformation is definitely one element. I think what we've also seen, as I heard the last speaker talk, is just the changing and how we work, right? The dynamic of our internal ways of working. Obviously, the whole remote versus on-site working, and then the hybrid elements as well. I mean, we from a Credit Suisse perspective are also trying different ways. Here in Switzerland, we are obviously going through another lockdown like similar in the UK. So we are fully remote at the moment. And it's been extremely successful for us, actually. We've built different types of relationships, and it requires people to, it's people on both sides to kind of push the envelope to try things differently and for people to really approach work differently. But all in all, it's been very positive for us, and it's really helped us also on our agile transformation, to drive things remotely. And it's also an equalizer for our global teams. We have teams in India. We have nearshore teams in Latvia, for example. We work very closely with them. And actually, this whole remote working has been an equalizer for them to be at the same table as our business stakeholders, as our IT stakeholders, everyone together. So I think it's been also very inclusive for a lot of our diverse teams around the world. So we've looked at this as a positive way of moving forward.
Sure, and with that last point, you've obviously had a heavy focus on the cultural transformation side of things within your role, which is of course a major part of any kind of digital business transformation. How has the needs and requirements changed within organizational culture in recent times? You kind of touched on it, that it's been a great equalizer there, but what kind of other things have changed with that cultural side of transformation?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question, Chris, around the fact that when I hear a lot of people talk about digital transformation, you might think about the hard skills, moving to cloud or new technologies or new DevOps pipelines, for example. But I think that what people need to really realize and focus on is the cultural element. Cultural mindset transformation is arguably even harder to do because it deals with people. Right. And I talked about how bringing the global teams closer together virtually, being that an equalizer, that's just one thing. Right. And, it's onus is on the individuals to have that continuous learning plans or that ambition. We heard the previous speaker talk about moving from a learn-it-all from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all. That's actually, Satya Nadella's favorite quote from Microsoft. And that's something that we have definitely start to digest as well internally, that we have to keep driving, we have to keep increasing our skills. And that's not just the hard skills, that's also the soft skills. So we can't forget about the importance of emotional intelligence, inclusion, empathy. all those are even much more important in a remote working setup, where a lot of things can get lost over the Zoom call, or lost in translation, as I always say. We work with several different languages and several different cultures as a Swiss-based bank, but even more so could be lost. So we need to make sure that we continue to work on that and find that way to work in that global organization, but still think about the local teams in every site.
Mm-hmm. And with that as well, how have you adapted personally to kind of the remote working and disparate working?
Yeah, it's, I think my team will say, I used to not like it. I used to like that big separation between personal and home life, especially with a small daughter at home. It's I quite like the separation where you can go to work and not deal with the crying, for example, or whatever. But I think that there's pros and cons. The pros is I'm able to watch her grow in front of my eyes, which is a fantastic opportunity. And we have to take everything like an opportunity. For every challenge brings an opportunity. And the remote working, while it could be a challenge, there's also some positives around, again, the inclusion, reaching out. It's so easy to reach out to people now. You don't have to worry about presence in the room. It's more around presence over a webcam. Again, a very different skill that people need to realize around how they approach their kind of toolkit, so to speak. But from my perspective, I quite like the remote working now. I'm very much in the groove. I've got my little setup going on here, and it's going to stay around for a while. And even in the future, we will be open and flexible. I think the number one thing that we have all taken away is that we are able to be successful remotely, and everyone will have their own personal preference, right? And some people may want to go into the office, some may not, for personal reasons or whatever. And there will be some times when we do go into the office, like workshops or conferences or certain recognition events, whatever it may be. But I do think that for the norm, most people will be offline or will be working remotely. And it also gives us, from a leadership perspective, a different way to review how we set up our teams, where we set up our teams, where we hire our people. We're no longer chained to, hiring people within a 100-kilometer radius, for example. We can hire people outside. Although we have different regulations here in Switzerland, we need to make sure we do things like data secrecy within the borders of Switzerland. But it gives us a little bit more latitude to kind of think differently how we recruit our talent and how we retain our talent. So, this whole pandemic has given us new angles to review how we approach our workforce.
Nice. And then with change management and, of course, continuous improvement, they're both real boil down to kind of exceptional communication and leadership. How is this possible in the present? And as a leader yourself, do you have any kind of proven methods of leading during the difficulty in communication right now?
Yeah, I mean, proven. I mean, it's just like everyone else, right? We've all been in this together. I think that communication is absolutely essential, whether you're in the pandemic or you're not, right? And I think that this is about how do we communicate appropriately at all levels, upwards, downwards, left, right, and the classic 360 communication, right? And I think that even in the pandemic, even being remote, communication through the normal channels is expected. But excellent communication through the normal channels is expected, but you need to do more, right? You need to go above and beyond in a remote setup. And that means things like, setting up ad hoc sessions, reaching out to colleagues who may not be so vocal in certain meetings, but you need to get their views or buy-in, for example. Always having the video on. I think the video on also brings a different dimension. Earlier in the pandemic, for example, at Credit Suisse, we had some network challenges and we all couldn't get on video, for example, at the very beginning. But once our network matured and hardened, we got on video all the time, and it's made a huge difference in the receptiveness of the communication, how our teams feel they've been communicated to, and it's much more personable as well. I think also, process and documentation, all that stuff is even more important. People think that in an agile setup, forget about documentation and process and all that stuff. Actually, you need much more of that. You need much more rigor and discipline. And I think my final point around, like a tip around, how to get through these difficult times, it's more around how do we care for the customer, right? And caring for the customer, whether it's the end user or you have internal customers within the large corporation that you're in, but how do you be in the customer's shoes? How do you understand their needs, their prerogative, or their wants from their perspective, and ultimately reduce those layers between you and the end customer, whether it's you from a project or program or delivery setup all the way to the end customer, or if you're in operations and you need to get to the end customer, but you need to find a way to hear it from the horse's mouth. And often, especially in large organizations, there are too many layers in between. There's a change agent, or there's a line manager or a team leader in between, and then there's one on the other side as well. And then, of course, like the game of telephone, the communication gets lost, and suddenly you start to hear rumors or the wrong things get communicated.
Sure.
And especially in this setup, it's all about direct communication. So especially if you have, many tiers of leaders underneath you or above you, it's important to reach out directly, as frequent and as often as possible to those individuals, so that they also hear and feel you as well as a leader. But I think it's really important, communication, and this is all types of communication as well, by the way, written and verbal communication. But I do think that that's extremely important during this time.
Sure, no, that's a really good answer. Thank you. And then we often read about digital transformation failure rates and having a high failure rate. Exactly how that's measured, I'm not entirely sure. But technology leaders are often cited as getting the execution wrong. Analysis does suggest that in part change management fails due to kind of outdated models which don't meet the needs of a dynamic business environment. Just how essential is it, in your opinion, to evolve models and replace these legacy systems and, of course, legacy ways of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I got a couple points to this, Chris. I think the first thing is that, legacy is going to be with us all the time. And I think that, especially for us at Credit Suisse, we are living in a lot of legacy, and we have to figure out how we work with the legacy. We don't just say that we're going to ignore and replace and create new, because actually by the time you create new, that new piece will be legacy, because there's going to be something new, right? So you need to think about, how do we work and create that partnership? How do we get these legacy systems to produce the right data for the new systems, for example, et cetera. But I think, to your first point, why are these digital transformation initiatives failing in the first place? And I think it's about, there's a lot of assumptions. We talked about the communication aspect, but I think that there are many digital transformation teams that are set up, or people who have the head of digital titles, or groups that are running digital, but they're not necessarily running the actual P&L, or they're not actually the actual business stakeholders who are running the business. And so, the most important thing is, how do we listen and learn to understand the needs of the stakeholders, of the end users, of the clients, so that we can co-create, right, these solutions, the digital solutions for them. So we need to co-create with those business representatives, or the business stakeholders, or the P&L owners, or whoever that may be, so that we can create the solution, the approach, and agree how we roll that out. Because, of course, you're not doing big bang approaches all the time. Sometimes you need some staggered approaches, and you need to be able to partner with them. So listening, learning, co-creation, and partnership are really the key aspects of how I see working with the business. And, ultimately, the business are going to be the ones who are going to judge and tell you whether or not the digital transformation initiative is successful or not. And finally, it's around being extremely transparent. And this is really all around the agile transformation mindset, but, demoing and iterating continuously, so, every time you sprint and you demo, then you get the feedback, points, and then iterate again and do it over and over and over. And I think having that agile discipline is just as important, because then you get the touch points with the end users, you hear their feedback, and then you can iterate. I think the challenge is making sure that with such a wide variety of stakeholders, for me, for example, we service almost every single type of role, front-facing colleague in the bank. So, we have private clients, we have retail clients, we've got investment consultants, we've got corporate clients, for example. They're all very diverse and very different. So who do we listen to? And that is also a different part of that, is that we need to have empowered colleagues who are facing those front colleagues, to make sure that we have a clear set of objectives, a prioritized set of objectives, so that we can go on and build and deliver for all of our end users.
Nice. I've had a question come in from the audience here from Lenny. Thanks for that, Lenny. You've mentioned the importance of using soft skills for digital transformation. Could you give us some tangible examples of how you've done that?
So soft skills. I think that, a lot of the team, the colleagues that I have on the team are engineers, developers that are absolutely great at developing, right? And I think that a lot of the challenges that they have is, getting to articulate their work so that the business can understand the business value. Right. Ultimately, this is around how do we communicate business value, whatever you define business value to be. And often, I often talk to colleagues and they say, my work should speak for itself. And actually, that's fine. And in many cases it does. But in a large organization with many divisions, many regions, many business areas, it could get lost in the noise. And I think it's really important that, especially the engineering colleagues, because we're trying to promote and develop an engineering culture where we're focusing on giving the voice to the engineers all the way down to the end user. Those engineers need to be prepared to communicate appropriately. So one of the major elements that we're focusing on for the soft skills part is the communication. And it's not about a sales pitch. It's more around how do they position themselves, or to position the output of what they've created, the widgets that they produced, to equate to business value. And the best way for them to do that is that they need to understand the business strategy. They need to understand why. And that's the main thing, right? They need to understand why are they producing the widgets they're being asked to produce, not just because the agile story point said you need to do this, right? It's because they understand the bigger picture.
Sure.
So part of our responsibility as leaders is to make sure that we not only empower and encourage our developers to improve their communication aligned to business value. My responsibility is to make sure that these developers understand the bigger picture and the rationale, and most importantly, the purpose. And that's why, having those continuous dialogues, the knowledge exchange sessions that we have with our front stakeholders, bring them in to the development shops. In fact, pre-pandemic, we often had visits that we would go out to, contact centers, branches, operation centers, all the people who are using our tools so that we can hear it from the front directly. And now post-pandemic, we obviously can't do that, but we do the same thing virtually. And we also do it reverse. So we bring people from the front, and like a relationship manager, for example, and we bring him or her into one of our development guilds. And we say, hey, what do you do after you get coffee in the morning? What's your day like? What do you do when you go through and you set up a meeting with a client, you have an advisory process, you have a post meeting with the client and a follow-up? How do you use our tools? What's your pain points? And so those dialogues with a different, diverse set of stakeholders and different power users, we get a different view, and it ultimately educates our engineers to empower them to communicate better to the business. So this is all around, improving communication as a soft skill, number one priority for us.
Yeah, nice. That's a really good answer, and thanks, Lenny, for the question there. So digital change management, going back to that, it's often defined in four key areas. We've got prepare, define, design, and then finally build and verify. How do you best plan change in your own experience, and how can leaders get off to the best possible start?
Yeah, I mean, part of my role is, I'm accountable for strategic transformation, but also operations, production support as well. The whole kind of life cycle comes under my remit. And I think when I think about digital change management, we need to move away from the traditional triple constraint. Right. And so this is the triple constraint. Those of you who are kind of the PMI school, it's, scope, time, cost, quality, etc. And we need to move away from those kind of fixed triple constraint and move towards a focusing on scope, but fixed capacity and time box sprints. So it's prioritizing the scope, right? So instead of having a fixed scope, we focus on prioritizing the scope, and because we have a continuous backlog of new features, improvements, stability activities that we're doing day in and day out. So I think that's the first thing, is we need to get out of the old ways of working, the old ways of kind of project management, and move towards product management and product ownership. So as I already mentioned, right, we need to also think about how do we cater for operations. Often, especially in the old days before digital came about, you would often throw the thing over the fence after you went through your closure phase of projects. You'd throw it over the fence for someone else to manage, right? You would work with service management and you would create a service wrapper, and then off it went. And then the project person would go off to the next project, and then you leave operations to deal with the operations. What we're doing now, especially at Credit Suisse, is we have merged those organizations together. So now I have accountability for operations as well. So it's the you build it, you break it, you fix it, and you run it mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, if we do have a major incident in production, my phone is going off. It's my application. And so it is a challenge. It's a different type of a way of approaching it, but it also gives us much more visibility of all of the issues in production, and most importantly, we have much more rapid approach to resolving it for the end users, because we hold the prioritization. So we work very closely with our business colleagues to prioritize those incidents. So instead of prioritizing new features or functionality, we're actually prioritizing production incidents that's impacting the end users. And we're hearing this feedback loud and clear. So instead of getting it lost between organizations because someone else is running the application for you, now I'm accountable. So I have nowhere to hide, right? And I think this is, it is extremely challenging. This has been going on for the last year in our setup, because dealing with production with so many different users across geographies is a challenge. It's a new skill set. It's a different skill set to have. But I do think that, when you think about change management, think about the whole cycle. Right? That's how I would answer that question, Chris. It's about the whole cycle all the way to running it and maintaining it. Because, the project, we don't think about projects anymore. We don't have a project mindset. It's about a product mindset. It's about a running mindset. So we build it and we run it.
Nice, really good answer. And then finally, to wrap things up, a question that I've asked our first speaker, Michael, and our second speaker, Bernie, there, about looking beyond the pandemic and the future of work. How do you see the future of work looking? Are we looking at hybrid working models? Are we looking at further working into the cloud? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from a Credit Suisse, or at least from my organization's perspective. I mean, we're really applying a remote first mentality. We look at this as an opportunity, and we do think that there will be a time and place for meeting at the office, whether it's on-sites or workshops or different specific events that are targeted, short and sharp, and then we go back to remote working. Remote working for us, I feel and I believe it will be the standard. It will be something that I will be practicing. In fact, I will be looking for that in any team organization that I will be working in. So instead of being a nice to have, it's now a requirement for a lot of job seekers. And that's why I talked about talent and how we grow our talent in the future and retain our talent. I do think that, the remote working will enable our, team culture and inclusion, as I talked about. But that means our team culture needs to adapt. We need to think about how do we continue to include our colleagues, for example, offshore and nearshore. I also think, around the future ways of working is this continued importance on digital enablement and transformation. This strategy that we have is only going to continue, as I mentioned. We're going to have more of it, much more of it, and we need to get ready to continue to deliver against it. And I also think that there's an onus on the individuals to be really digitally fit for future, right? We talked about training. I think that a lot of these individuals need to expect to train themselves, be on this continuous learning journey themselves rather than being told to train, or they have to do these mandatory trainings. I mean, that's like the bare minimum. Every individual should want to have this thirst for more knowledge and thirst to continue to transform. And I also do think, finally, there's going to be this need for more asynchronous working. I think that a lot of the remote working that we have right now is really a lift and drop of what we had. We're just remote. So we still have the same meetings, some often of the same duration, the same structure of approach of work, but, we're going to pivot to the next maturity of remote working, which is all around asynchronous working, where you don't necessarily have to be always on all the time, because you have the ability to work when you need to, and to input and contribute when you need to, through an asynchronous way. And I think that that will be, for those companies that are able to crack that will be the next evolution. And you'll see that for a lot of the tech companies, and a lot of the kind of more traditional companies have some catching up to do.